Greetings, listeners. We're coming at you from a roasty, toasty 90-degree February day here in San Diego.
The heat wave that came from out of nowhere.
Exactly. And today, as you know, for those of you who have faithfully listened to our last two episodes, you'll know that every podcast that we released, we do so while eating a ring-shaped food, hence the name Lords of the Ring-Shaped Foods.
That's us. We're the Lords of the Ring-Shaped Foods. Today, we have prepared bagels. Aaron, I see that you have a bagel, an everything bagel from Trader Joe's. If you'd like to sponsor us, Trader Joe's.
We wouldn't say no.
We wouldn't say no. Tell me about that bagel.
You know, it's I've got kind of a paradoxical bagel here because, as you said, it's an everything bagel, but the toppings are very plain. Just simple butter. I'm a simple man. What about you, Alex?
I have prepared. It is the second half of the everything bagel. We cut it in half. I put some whipped cream cheese on there. I have some leaves of arugula and then a slice of Swiss cheese on top of that. And I am looking forward to eating it.
Well, without further ado,
We're gonna
cheers.
Clink our bagels.
Clink. This is always the best part.
This is for our ASMR. ASMR. Is that what they're called?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, ASMR listeners.
Mm-hmm.
I hate that.
Enjoy.
We're going to lose like half of our viewership.
And gain a new half.
So true.
All right.
That was
So
delicious.
the big news these days is we have heard some concrete details surrounding the Amazon Lord of the Rings series.
Mm-hmm.
We have a title, which is The Rings of Power.
Mm-hmm. There was a teaser sort of promotional video that came out of. It was super neat too. It was like a wooden table, and then they were like forging like metal into the shape of letters, like the Rings of Power.
Mm-hmm.
And then there was like a sort of accompanying video of like how they did it, and it was like actually real, not computer generated.
Yeah,
I loved
wild.
it. Yeah.
So that was fun to see. We also have two other kind of info dumps.
Mm-hmm.
The first one coming in the form of promotional posters that they released, which feature the hands of multiple characters. So today we'll kind of be surmising who we think those might be, as well as some of the ones that we already know whose they are. And then the third portion was an article released by Vanity Fair that's kind of a first look at what we can expect from the series.
Can you imagine getting to be part of that group of people that got to watch the first 3 episodes like already? I am jealous.
Yeah.
This is what I'm feeling inside of me. It's jealousy.
That would be probably one of the most exhilarating experiences, partially because that would just be super fun to have that inside scoop and see what is sure to be just like a global phenomenon with record spending on this series. But also the NDAs they must sign. You have to be so careful with the way you interact with the outside world at that point.
Well, because everybody's going to be wanting to interview you about your experience. And I imagine if you're in that position, you want to share, but you just can't. You have to stay secret.
Yeah.
Like, can you even share with your family or like spouses?
Wild.
Probably not.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't think so. It's probably like being a government spy or something.
How was work today, honey? You know I can't tell you. The NDA is airtight.
So good.
But yeah, so that Vanity Fair article came out, and we were thinking today of kind of running through some of the things that we read in that article, of sort of sneak peeks about the new series that's coming out on Amazon on September 2nd, I think.
September 2nd, baby.
Woo! And then also, this is a little bit in anticipation of a trailer that's going to come out tomorrow. Is that true?
Oh, yeah, during the Super Bowl.
Yeah. I am so looking forward to that and seeing like some of the cinematic elements of like what the series will look like, because it
Yeah.
already feels like some of the photos that have been shared already feel different than Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings.
Yeah. Yeah. That'll be interesting to see. And I'm curious too, because even between the Lord of the Rings series and the Hobbit series,
Mhm.
there is a very big difference in the cinematography.
Mhm.
And when I watched The Hobbit, I think part of what I didn't like about it was how shiny it all was, which made it feel more fantastical.
Yeah.
Whereas the Lord of the Rings series, like it felt like a real tangible world. And so I would hope that this current series kind of continues in that direction. Well, of the original Lord of the Rings. Um, and all in all, I think my perspective towards it is just like excitement and gratitude for new material to kind of binge on and be excited about. Uh, and so I think I am probably less skeptical than many people are. But there's definitely still things that I don't know. I guess there's pitfalls that could make it disappointing to me for sure.
Indeed. Should we get into some of the things that we are both looking forward to and some of the things that these pitfalls that you talked
Yeah,
about?
yeah, definitely. Go for it.
Fantastic. One of the things that we know, or rather, some of the characters and their actors have been announced. So, for instance, Galadriel, the actress, has been announced. The actor for Elrond has been announced. There are two dwarves who reside in Khazad-dûm, which is the mines of Moria. Their actors have been announced, as well as Celebrimbor and a few other people that are named characters that did not appear in the Silmarillion. One of the things that I noticed is that it seems like Galadriel is going to be very centric to much of the story. At least that's the way that the article made it seem to me, which I don't hate.
Yeah.
Those are big shoes to fill by this actress, but Galadriel in this part of the timeline is like 3,000 years younger.
Yeah.
And so I think that there's a lot of room to have a different interpretation of that character from the one that appears in The Lord of the Rings and The Hobbits.
Yeah. I will say also, so I listened to an analysis of this first look article by the Nerd of the Rings channel on
interesting.
YouTube. And one of the things that they were nervous about was in the description of Galadriel in the article, it kind of makes her seem like a spunky upstart, like someone who I don't know, wants to carve their own way in the world and I don't know, get recognition for themselves, which in a way like is a part of Galadriel's story arc. But I think that's much more something that appears in her originally when she's leaving Valinor way back when to come to Middle-earth originally, whereas after the First Age, all of her older brothers are dead.
Yeah.
And she has seen like undescribable vastness of war.
Yeah.
And she definitely is like weathered.
She didn't
by that
participate
point.
in the war against Morgoth, did she?
No, not really. But she definitely witnessed it.
Yeah.
And yeah, like I said, was weathered by it.
Indeed. As you say that, I'm wondering if in the show they will sort of push some of that spunkiness or like that sort of characteristic of her from the First Age into the Second Age. Maybe maybe there are like recollections or memories of her like becoming isolated or alone, that they are able to push some of that from the First into the Second Age.
Yeah. And we were talking a little bit about this earlier, but another thing mentioned in the article was how they're going to have to compress the timeline in order to tell the narrative and have people connect with the characters like the studio would hope for them to.
Yeah.
And so I think within that knowledge, I could see them having the aspect of Galadriel in that she like wants to establish her own realm and gain her own power and eventually like feel the shame of not wanting to go back to Aman and like admit that she was wrong originally. So yeah, I could see them making that a part of her second age story.
Mm-hmm. Definitely.
She is one of the characters that we see in the posters.
Yeah.
So what we do see is her in a suit of armor, and she's holding an elven blade, or I mean, I assume an elven blade, but you can see the silver and the gold and the tree shapes at the top that represent the two trees from Valinor that she would have seen and probably would have been sacred to her. So who knows where this dagger comes from, but
That's dope.
yeah,
That's so cool.
very striking piece of weaponry.
One of the pictures that came out described her as the commander of the northern armies. And I wonder how, like, okay, I have thoughts. One of the things is during the Second Age, Sauron appears as Anatar, helps Celebrimbor make rings of power, or like they do that together. And then Sauron like reveals himself, and then the sort of like the fleet, the armies of Numenor go and attack him. I think at Umbar. Is that where he's hanging out? Not sure. But they go and attack Sauron, and instead of, I think, fighting it out, Sauron just surrenders, and that's sort of part of his long game.
Yeah.
So potentially, that's in the series as like, oh, also Galadriel is there leading an army against Sauron.
Yeah. 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 Sauron is definitely going to be, I think, one of the most interesting and intriguing character arcs to see how they handle. And one of the posters that was revealed, I'm sure by many people was assumed to be Sauron, because we see this like black iron gauntlet with spikes on the knuckles and this kind of swoopy, sinister looking, long handled black sword. Which I could see eventually being Sauron, because at a certain point, once he does become like an advisor to the king in Numenor, he eventually basically corrupts the whole island to start worshiping darkness, and like Melkor through the darkness.
Yeah.
So I could see it eventually getting to this point, but that's less convincing to me than the idea of one of the Nazgul.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I really like this photo, or like this still of like the gauntleted hand. I think especially the pommel is striking to me, where the pommel of this sword is, I don't know, it's kind of spider-like. It's not exactly like arachnid legs, but there are these like black sort of gems that are set into the pommel in like a haphazard way. It just feels very like cancerous or malignant.
This does look like spider eyes.
It does, yeah. Down below, like on the crossguard, it does look a little more spider-like. So maybe that's a little bit of a nod to Ungoliant or Shelob. I could see it being the Witch King of Angmar, like maybe before he's immediately turned, or like before he like dies and turns into the Ring Wraith, like when he's a guy.
Yeah, like during his, well, I guess like his final destination is this transition zone between the living world and the Wraith world.
That's true.
So yeah, I definitely would put my money on the Witch King at this point. But yeah, it's a good point. Where within his story might this picture fall?
Yes, if you recall from our first podcast, one of the things that we were hoping for is not for Sauron to be obvious immediately. that we would kind of, or I'm going to speak for myself. I would really like to be fooled, the way that all of the elves were fooled.
Like in Frozen.
Exactly like Frozen. Oh,
the
Hans.
prince? Yeah,
Gotcha. I was like, I don't remember the part in Frozen where Sauron comes and deceives the elves.
You got to watch it again, man.
I do. It's all about reading in between the lines. But I want to be deceived the same way, where it's like I don't want it to be like, oh, there's Sauron. I'd like for it to be like, oh, the scenes where we visit Celebrimbor, for those to be like, oh, I don't know, like great ingenuity and discovery.
Yeah.
Where he's being gifted this knowledge of how to create these incredible rings of power that maybe offer boons to the different races.
Very sincere. Actually, I could see somewhat of a like a Gandalf character within a younger body's guise. Whereas, like, when you meet Gandalf as a character, you know he can be trusted. And so similarly, I would hope for the same thing. Like, when you meet Anatar, you know he can be trusted. But then eventually that ends up just getting thrown out the window.
Yeah. Do you think that do you think that this poster is supposed to be Anatar? So there's one that has like
that's
an
a great
old
question.
man, like you can tell there's like a scraggly beard, and it's a guy with kind of like dirty hands holding an apple. I got very much the witch from Snow White vibes from it.
Yeah.
And I'm like, yeah, what do you think about that poster?
So this one, I mean, the vibes themselves give me Gandalf vibes.
Yes.
And I wouldn't picture this as Anatar because what I envision from the literature is someone younger looking.
Yes. Elven, right?
Yeah. And so, I don't know, maybe that would be a really good route for them to go to trick everyone in that way. But it could be a blue wizard as well.
Yes.
Or any of the Istari sent to Middle Earth during the Second Age.
Were they sent during the Second Age?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, maybe it is Gandalf. Yeah, at no point do the wizards...
Wait. Was it during the Second or the Third Age?
I kind of thought it was during the Third Age. I know that the blue wizards went during the Second Age and then returned during the Third Age.
Okay, yes.
So I think only the blue wizards came during the Second Age. I didn't want to... I don't know. I think...
That makes more sense.
But what I was going to say still applies. At no point do the wizards grow up. They are old from when they are created, because they're not people. They are like angels that are sent down to do the Valar's will. Yeah, so potentially it's a blue wizard. I know that, one of the things I read in that article is that they're going to be exploring like southern kingdoms. So like Umbar and
Harad.
Harad. They're going to be exploring those different kingdoms. Also the kingdom of Linden, or is that just a city? Anyway.
Gil-galad's kingdom.
Indeed.
Heck yeah.
Heck to the yes. And so I forgot where I was going with that.
You said they're going to explore the southern kingdoms.
Indeed. So I was going to say maybe the blue wizards start there on their kind of journey east.
Yeah. Yeah, and also I was just thinking it'll be interesting to see the interactions between the Numenorians and the mainlanders at that time.
Right. Oh my gosh.
Because they were seen as like the bringers of civilization.
Yes. I'm just imagining like what that would be like to live in, I don't know, like a pre-civilized sort of civilization, like live among nomadic peoples, and then all of a sudden you're visited by essentially aliens.
Yeah.
That have untold riches and knowledge, understanding of like sciences, mathematics, magic, that just sail in on these like incredible boats. not only are they, well, they are humans, but they're like humans plus. They are incredibly long lived, the original Numenorians, something like 600 years or something like that.
Yeah, somewhere around there.
That is a wild sort of interaction between the men of Middle Earth and the men of Numenor.
Yeah, and we were just talking about Harad being one of the potential regions that they'll explore in the south.
Yeah.
Also in the Vanity Fair article, there are these two characters that were created for the series named Bronwyn and Arondir. So Bronwyn is like this human healer person, right?
Yes, in the teaser posters, I'm pretty sure she's the one with the scythe.
Cool. And then, so yeah, I mentioned the second one was Arondir. Is that what I said?
Yes, you
Yeah,
did say Arondir.
Who is apparently a Sylvan elf, like the woodland elves, who I think were the predecessors to the same elves that Legolas lived among. Anyway, it says that these two who have a forbidden love between human and elf are meeting in this picture in the village of Tir Harad. So I've got to wonder if that's a disambiguation of the wider Haradrim kingdom where they might be meeting.
I would guess so. They're also sharing in you said a forbidden love, which what I am thinking of is that tension that the Numenorians experience between their elven lineage and then their human lineage that they sort of more so embrace over the course of the Third Age. The Second Age, where the kings of Numenor and queens eventually start taking different names. They stop taking elven names and they start taking human names. And so this might be the sort of stand-in for like the Arwen and Aragorn like forbidden love in this series, where it's like, yeah, humans and elves have very different timelines of their lives, and mixing these two populations it just doesn't work.
Yeah.
It would be like a person, I don't know, just the timeline of like, okay, yeah, this marriage might last 50 years, but an elf is going to live 10, 15 times that long.
Yeah, and you got to wonder because like any instance that we hear of from the Tolkien material is where men and elves fall in love. Like they turn out to be these pinnacles of like the entire story of the world.
Yeah.
And so you have to wonder like whether this will also be one of those pinnacles or whether it will be kind of just another example of what may have happened more frequently than we may have heard about in Tolkien's writings, in their interpretation through the series. Yeah, I just wonder how significant it's going to be within the larger framework of the story.
Hard to say.
Yeah.
Hard to say.
There's another portion in here, moving on through the article, where it talks about an enigma. So it mentions people were curious whether hobbits might feature in this story, although hobbits weren't really around in the Second Age. But it does talk about the presence of hobbit ancestors called Harfoots. And the quote from the article is, "Two lovable, curious Harfoots, played by Megan Richards and Markella Kavanagh, encounter a mysterious lost man whose origin promises to be one of the show's most enticing enigmas." And it's kind of a throwaway line within the article because it just moves right on immediately after that.
Yeah.
But that gets me wondering about like the enigma that I think any Tolkien fan would think of, who's Tom Bombadil.
Yeah.
Like you don't ever really find out what Tom Bombadil is, and I think Tolkien refused to come up with an answer for that. Like he didn't even know. And he said that all the best stories have enigmas.
It's true. It's true. I'm also thinking about I don't know. Tom Bombadil is fascinating in that he's like super duper old and like the ring has no effect on him. And he's is he married to Goldberry?
Yeah.
He's just, you know, in love with the personification of nature. I wonder if this encounter between the two. I also like that the sort of main Harfoots that we'll be experiencing are played by women. I think that's something that we could talk about a little bit after this is like just the diversity of cast. But yeah, like how fascinating would it be for sort of the lineage of the hobbits to be impacted by an encounter with Tom Bombadil or something like that. Like
Yeah.
maybe his blessing over the hobbits is like what gives them their ability to be sort of untainted by the world, secret, you know, hidden away.
Yeah. So I'm very curious to hear who that enigma is that they're talking about.
Any other guesses as to who it could possibly be?
Not at this point, because you had mentioned when we were talking about the posters that there's one here where it looks like female hands are clothed
I would
in
guess
kind
that's-
of burlap clothing, and it's like her hair is woven as the strap of her purse and is holding some basically giant raspberries. And so what you had mentioned earlier was that you were wondering if that could be Goldberry.
Yeah.
And if so, that makes me wonder if the poster that was posted right next to it, right before it, of these male-looking hands, dirty, holding a pretty like intricate-looking short staff, maybe made out of a giant ram's horn or something like that, could be Tom Bombadil.
You know, that's true because, wow. Okay. I was less stoked about the idea of seeing Tom Bombadil in this show. I think I could come around to that. I think that it could be a really neat sort of inclusion where it was left out in the Lord of the Rings trilogy.
Yeah. And I was happy about that for the trilogy because when I read the book, I don't know. I never really liked the insertion of Tom Bombadil as a character. It didn't seem like he added much, and he was, I don't know, it was just like a weirdly jovial interlude.
You ready to pause the main storyline for 60 pages?
Yeah. So weird.
Indeed. I think that could be pretty neat. Yeah, I don't have any really other thoughts of like who that could be.
Yeah.
Another one of the named people, well, there's two humans that are named. One of them is Halbrand, who there's a picture in the article of Halbrand and Galadriel like at sea in a storm, and they like have to lean on each other to like get through that disaster or something like that. Unsure of what this person's role will be. I was noting earlier that I'm like, that'd be weird if Halbrand was kind of like the romantic interest of Galadriel, because Galadriel is full married at this point of the Silmarillion to Celeborn. But maybe that's the direction that they want to take it.
I don't think it will be, and maybe that's just wishful thinking. But I don't know. I was thinking recently about how much I appreciate within narratives very sincere, loving relationships that are completely non-sexual.
I do. Yeah, I can relate to that.
And maybe that's even more than they'll encounter of each other. But yeah, even just like Frodo and Sam.
Yeah.
It's like such a genuine friendship.
True.
And I like those storylines.
I do too. There's not enough of them.
But in this picture you were talking about, it's also just really impressive seeing the studio that they're filming in. Because like you see this crane sticking out from the foreground and then a camera out at the end of it basically covered up in this big plastic bag because they're filming this stormy shipwreck scene completely practically. Like the entire stage is flooded and you have waves crashing up on the walls and these two characters sitting out in this kind of like, I don't even, like this little broken apart raft in the middle of the water.
Mm-hmm.
It's amazing.
I mean, those scenes are going to be fantastic.
Yeah. And just the budget alone, I think, is like opens so many doors of possibilities for this series.
Yes. Thank you, Jeffrey Bezos. I was going to say that it appears to me like Halbrand is a sailor. And you know who else is a sailor? Isildur. Who will be appearing in this series. As we know, Isildur is the guy who is supposed to throw the ring into Mount Doom, but he don't.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm curious to see how we see Isildur. Because like we talked about before, obviously the whole timeline is going to be compressed. Because the other big thing I was wondering about is whether we think the producers of the series have an end already in mind. Because ultimately, like, you've got to think the series would end with something like the drowning of Numenor. But you can't just leave that as some ambiguous end date and spin out as many seasons as possible until the cash cow runs dry and still have the impact from that big moment. But also, if you have that big moment, what comes after?
Very true. Something that was in the article is that the showrunners, these two writers, I didn't catch their names, they pitched 50 hours worth of material to the studio. And so it seems to me like they already have a start to finish planned out. And I could guess where they would end it. That being at the sort of last battle, where they fight Sauron.
The Battle of Dagorlad?
Yeah, that's the one. Is it?
When the elves and the humans come together in the last alliance.
Exactly.
And they go to the foothills of Mount Doom.
Correct.
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
the one. I could see that being the ending place where it's like, you know, the very end. Well, that's another thing that I was thinking. Okay, let me finish one thought before I start another thought. That I could see that being the ending point, because after that, that's where Lord of the Rings picks up.
And that's where the Second Age actually ends.
Correct. Yeah. And so I could see that being the end. What I was going to say immediately after that point, or like in the middle of it, is this series is going to have very few storylines that end positively. Like Galadriel will, you know, her story will conclude as like a monarch of Lothlorien, and Elrond will, you know, then be sort of in charge of Rivendell. But at that point, his brother will be long dead. And it will end on a lot of sour notes of like, sure, we were kind of successful in defeating this like physical form of Sauron, but it's only a matter of time before he comes back.
Yeah. Like they lost the entire civilization of Numenor. Yeah, and his like Sauron's corruption remains in the world.
Compelling stories, but that is kind of the flavor of the Second Age, is Sauron sowing these seeds of corruption, both physically in the form of rings, but then also, you know, more largely when he surrenders to Numenor and then changes their society to become a Melkor worshipping one. And then he's like, "Don't you guys want to actually live forever?" And they're like, "Yeah, we do want to live forever." And they sail to heaven.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, the second age, I think, leaves the most room for, I guess, interpretation of extra material because it's kind of like a few thousand years of build up, build up, build up, seeds sown, and then within just a couple hundred years, you have Sauron corrupting the lands of Numenor, Numenor getting destroyed, and then Sauron reappearing in Middle Earth and like raising armies and then getting defeated again. Whereas the first age, it's like, I think it's less than 500 years long. And that's pretty much like just fraught with battles the entire time. So there's tons of material within a short amount of time there. And then in the third age, obviously a lot happens at the end there. But in the second age, there is very much that can be still explored within the buildup of everything.
Definitely. Definitely. I mean, even just the number of rings. Like,
Yeah.
the number of rings, like 9 rings for men, 7 rings for dwarves, 3 rings for the elves. And so each of the elves that gets a ring are in the show. Like, I think we already know that. Isn't it? So Elrond, Galadriel, and Gil-galad?
I think Círdan.
Círdan gets one of the rings?
I think so.
Okay. So he'll probably be in the show. But then you think about each one of those 7 dwarves being a named character, which maybe. And then each one of those 9 humans receiving a ring could potentially be a story that is explored. I think that's what they did in one of the video games, but I didn't play it.
Here's my question to you.
Yep.
Do you think that Morgoth will be mentioned in this series? While you're thinking about that,
Thank you.
let me throw in a correction that I just looked up. So originally, it looks like the 3 keepers of the Elven Rings were Galadriel, Círdan, and Gil-galad. And then eventually, they were Galadriel, Gandalf, and Elrond.
Yes. I can imagine that I pronounce it a little differently than you, but I think they're both right. I pronounce it Gil-galad. I think that Gil-galad would give it to Elrond because it seems like Elrond's character is going to be very politically sort of minded in this show. Like, he's going to just be hanging out in the cities doing politicking and stuff like that. And so I can imagine that being a major plot point of whenever Gil-galad decides to give that to Elrond, or maybe like by passing away or something like that.
Yeah,
that's
and he was his right hand man, so that would make a lot of sense.
Twould. And then I don't remember a lot about Círdan, but he would probably be in the show too. It seems important.
Yeah, I can't off the top of my head remember what his role might be during all of this. And it's actually kind of nice because go for it.
Go for it.
I was going to say it's kind of nice because I'm at the point where I've read the Silmarillion a couple times, but I'm starting to forget a lot of the material.
Yeah.
So it's a nice point where I'm not so in it that I'll be like analyzing everything against the source material. And also, like, when things that I do know about show up, I can be reminded and like, oh yeah, that's something that and now that it's sparked in my memory, brings back up rather than just waiting and expecting and being disappointed if things aren't mentioned.
For sure. Yes. I mean, in order to take these like 3,500 years and make a compelling narrative out of it, it makes sense to me that they would need to condense the series into at least the lifetime of a human. Like that makes sense. Unless they were doing a bunch of time jumps, which I don't know. That kind of worked in The Witcher. There would need to be like a lot of storyboarding to like make that work. But Yeah, I think I forget where I was going with that.
We were just talking about Gil-galad and Elrond. Is that what you were going to mention?
I was going to mention something about that. Well, you had asked a question earlier of like, do you think that Melkor or Morgoth is going to be
Oh,
mentioned
yes,
in the
yes.
show? And I think that yes. There's the shadows of Morgoth are still there, where Elrond and his brother Elros, um, their lineage was like directly involved with the like that war against Melkor, and then eventually the Numenorians begin to worship Melkor and like do ritual sacrifice to that deity.
Yeah.
And so I think yes, and that's going to be something new for a lot of viewers of Lord of the Rings, because I think that most people, if you were to ask like, oh, like who's the big bad of Lord of the Rings, they would be like Sauron. But Sauron is only one of the big bads. In
Yeah.
fact, he is like a student of.
A less powerful big bad.
Exactly. At this point, so in the Second Age, Melkor is already banished. He's in like the void, essentially. But his influence has already happened. He has marred the world.
Yeah, the whole, basically the scarring of the world itself is Melkor's legacy within the world. And even the corruption of Sauron.
Yeah.
Like Melkor is the reason Sauron is who he is.
Indeed. I wanted to talk about another thing, so it's a little bit of a pivot, but we can relate it. Sauron is only one of the people that was corrupted, or the entities that was corrupted by Melkor. Melkor also corrupted the Maya known as the Balrogs, that potentially they were like just like fire spirits, and
Yeah.
he like corrupted them. We could potentially see a Balrog in the Rings of Power series.
Yes, I would love that. They mention Durin the Fourth as one of the characters that they show in the first look. And so we could see the Balrog Durin's Bane being awoken from the depths and basically contributing to the destruction of that entire civilization.
Indeed. I think that would be super duper cool to watch as this like thriving civilization underneath the mountain, Khazad-dûm, go from that of like prosperity, commerce, mining, to then he gets one of the rings of power and then becomes greedy, corrupted, all of those sorts of things, and then watch that civilization crumble as they like dig deeper and deeper and deeper and release destruction into their own city from below.
Yeah. I think that's one of the main themes that at least the books talk about, is how Sauron stirs up this dissatisfaction, and Melkor. They both stir up this dissatisfaction within the lives of beings of Middle Earth. So, like, for example, for humankind, they are given this gift of death. That's this kind of mysterious. It's the main difference between them and the elves. Like their mortality is not necessarily tied into the fate of the planet itself, where the elves are more connected to like the planet and nature, and like their well-being depends on it. And so death, like, originally was given as a gift by Iluvatar to men. But Melkor corrupts that idea and makes men fear it. And ultimately that's what leads the final Numenorian king, Ar-Pharazôn, to like seek out Sauron's counsel and learn about ways to try and thwart his own death.
Wow. That's just so good. I can't wait to see that in the show.
Yeah.
I like, man, because Sauron is like imprisoned. I did air quotes. Imprisoned in Numenor for a long time. And then over the course of, I think, hundreds of years, he then corrupts. He becomes like an advisor to the Numenorians. I could see that being like, oh, he's captured at the end of season 2, or maybe even at the end of season 1. And then there's like a slow burn of him becoming a figurehead in Numenor that leads to the eventual downfall of the Numenorians. Man, oh man.
I have very high hopes.
Yeah.
Like, I'm trying not to set my expectations too high, but I do think it's going to be really good.
I think so too. I mean, just like the pictures, even if it's just cinematically beautiful, like that alone is like, wow.
Yeah, it holds its own amount of satisfaction just within that. Yeah, we'll have to continue on this topic as we hear more and as we continue to dive into some of these posters that we haven't seen actual characters revealed for yet.
Indeed.
But with that, why don't we wrap up today's podcast?
Fantastic.
Alex, tell the listeners about today's sponsor.
Today's sponsor, as every time, is Bodyglide. Bodyglide, thank you so much for staving off chafing, for helping us walk an extra mile, for helping us stay on the path.
If you'd like to learn more about Bodyglide, you can visit their Instagram page.
I love this. We don't actually have a sponsor, but we're going to do it anyway just because.
It's prospective. Eventually they'll sponsor us.
Yeah,
and
like,
Trader Joe's.
If you want to have if you want to sponsor us, this is what it would sound
this
like.
This could be you.
Yeah, that we would go the extra mile to make it sound good.
There you have it.
That was hilarious. Fantastic. Well, I had a fantastic time talking about this new series, and potentially we have another one coming up soon after the trailer that comes out tomorrow.
You betcha.
Nice.
Thanks, folks. See you next time.
See ya.